Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this Biotron Investor webinar. I'm Rudy Michelson of Monsoon Communications. In today's webinar, Biotron will update shareholders on the big Sedarex acquisition news this morning. Joining us are CEO and Managing Director Michelle Miller and Non-Executive Director of Sedarex, Graeme Wald. Graeme Wald is very well known in the Australian biotech sector. Before we begin, let me point out that you can submit questions using the Q&A function, and we'll get to them after the presentation. I'll now hand over to Michelle Miller to lead the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Rudy. And welcome to everybody who is on this webinar or who may watch it afterwards. Really delighted to be here today with telling you about the exciting news that we released this morning with the acquisition of Sedarex Limited and a capital raising. So the aim of this webinar is to introduce Sedarex and introduce the opportunity to you, explain a little bit about the transaction, and I will encourage everybody to read the announcement that was released to the ASX this morning, as that contains considerable information and additional details. Also very pleased to be on this call with Graeme from Sedarex, who is, as Rudy said, many people in our industry are certainly very familiar with him. He's had a very long history in terms of experience as a director, an executive in the life science industry, and very strong capital markets experience and time with funds management, which is a really means that we have a lot of comfort in terms of the Sedarex opportunity with having people like him involved with it. So just for people who may not be familiar with Biotron, Biotron has been and continues to be an antiviral company. We have a board and management with strong history and background with pharma, finance and VC backgrounds. We're a clinical stage company with phase 2 assets, treating major life-threatening infections. And we also have a core discovery platform at the centre to target additional viral infections by targeting particular parts of the life cycle that's involved in pathogenesis. And these, of course, the main markets we're targeting, as people who followed us for a long time know, is HIV. But also we'll mention hepatitis B, which is an early stage program, which is a particularly interesting opportunity and a market that is still considered highly investable, certainly by US fund managers. Very briefly, with where Biotron is at, we've completed 12 clinical trials with our products. We have a broad spectrum antiviral drug. The clinical trials that we've completed with BIT225 are really important, not just for that asset, because it validates our approach and shows proof of principle of how we can treat viral diseases. As we have said throughout this year, our focus has been through 2025 on strategic commercialization of our clinical assets for ongoing development with a pharma partner. And as you will know, that we engaged with C14 at the end of last year. And those discussions and the footwork in terms of interaction with pharma is still in progress. It is not a fast process. We keep saying that, and that is the reality. The situation in the US in terms of changes within the FDA, some of the vaccine negativity, we're not a vaccine, infectious diseases and antivirals have sort of got caught up with that, means that it's a difficult position for us right now, but that doesn't mean we don't expect or hope to get a transaction out of this, but it will take longer than I guess any of us would probably like. And the other focus, as we've said throughout this year, has been expanding our hepatitis B program to partner ready stage. But to get on to the important bit for today's presentation, today we announced the acquisition of Sedarex. So throughout this year, while we've been out looking at on-selling, we also have been looking at other ways of how can we add real value to Biotron and create extra value for our shareholders going forward. We have looked at a lot of assets, most of which have been extremely early and have not been technologies that would be of value to our shareholders. But Sedarex, which is a public unlisted Australian company, fitted the bill as it held, I'd say, has late stage, lastly de-risked clinical asset called Sedarex, of which it has global patents. And this is for a safer next generation general anesthetic product. This opportunity broadens our pipeline beyond antivirals. We are very familiar with the development of small molecules, whether it be for cardiovascular, antivirals, or in this case, general anesthetic. It's the actual underlying indication is one thing, but it's more our company's expertise in understanding the regulatory space and clinical development and the links with commercial partners that are bits that really matter in terms of moving this forward. Sedarex has dual market opportunities. The general anesthetic market is a large market, which continues to grow. And Graeme will talk a bit more about this in his presentation after this. And in addition to the general anesthetic market, there are also additional high growth neuroscientific markets that this product is in development for. The other thing that really attracts us to this opportunity, apart from the large markets and the advanced stage of the asset, is the potential for fast processing, streamlined international regulatory pathways, which means shortened time getting through the FDA and EMA and onto market. This opportunity positions Biotron with a clear commercial pathway in additional multi-billion-dollar markets. And we believe this is a very compelling asset with the potential to provide significant returns for Biotron shareholders. I should also point out that this transaction has been very strongly supported by Peak Asset Management in Melbourne. And I'll just say at this point that the acquisition is subject to shareholder approval at the forthcoming AGM. So summary of acquisition terms, as I said, I will point you to Biotron's announcement of this morning for more details. But primarily, Biotron is purchasing 100% of Sedarex issued shares for value of 500 million Biotron fully paid shares at 0.3 cents a share. That's $1.5 million. So it's a scrip for scrip. And in addition, there are 2 performance milestones, each worth $250,000 on completion of particular milestones. So the additional 2 milestones, each worth $250,000, those shares won't be issued until particular hurdles are met in the development pathway. And of course, this transaction, as I've said, is dependent on a number of factors. Firstly, all Sedarex shareholders agreeing to sell their shares to Biotron, which is actually being completed. Biotron receiving firm commitments for placement, which is also completed. Due diligence, which is in progress. And importantly, Biotron shareholders approving the acquisition and the issue of the shares at the AGM in November. At completion of the transaction, after approval, a Sedarex nominee will be appointed as a director of Biotron. In addition to announcing the acquisition today, we also announced capital raising, which was led by Peak Asset Management in Melbourne. We have it's in 2 parts. The first part is a $1 million placement in 2 tranches, and full commitments have been received for that $1 million placement. issue price is 0.3 cents a share, which is basically our 15-day VWAP, with one attaching option for every 2 shares issued at 2 cents, expiring 2 years from date of issue. The placement is in 2 parts. The first tranche is under our listing rule with our 15% capacity, and that will bring in just under 600,000, and that happens and it will be completed within this next week. The second tranche is subject to shareholder approval at the AGM. In addition to the placement, which, as I said, which is fully committed, Biotron will also be subject to shareholder approval for the acquisition of Sedarex, will, after the AGM, launch a non-renounceable rights issue to give Biotron shareholders an opportunity to invest at under the same terms as the placement. And Peak will subscribe for any shortfall under the rights issue. And further details of this will, of course, be forthcoming. As I said, I'll point you to our current announcement and our upcoming notice of meeting for the AGM will also have additional information. So I'm going to now hand over to Graeme, who's a director of Sedarex, who will briefly outline the opportunity. We're not going to go into a huge amount of details today. We really just wanted to get in front of everybody and outline what we're proposing. And we expect that we will be doing additional webinars and providing additional information and slide decks in coming weeks. Thanks, Graeme.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Rudy, for hosting this. So, as Michelle has said, we're developing a general anesthetic. And let's be clear that current anesthetics all have a problem. They reduce blood pressure, they reduce respiration, airway control, and in many cases, they damage brain function. And this is basically across the board with all general anesthetics. The interesting thing is that there is a major player in the anesthetics market. It's a drug called propofol, which many of you may be familiar with. It's a white milky substance, and that is our major competition in the market. And it is well known that upon administration, propofol reduces blood pressure, reduces respiration and airway control, and anesthetists have to be prepared to manage all of these things. And as many of you know, upon recovering from a general anesthetic, there is a reduction in cognitive ability. People can be very confused, very mixed up. And the older you are, the longer it takes to recover from that cognitive damage. Do you want to move on to the next slide? So what we've done here is we've taken an old anesthetic that was on the market called Alcicin. And this was brought to the market by GSK in the 70s and 80s. And it was very, very well received, particularly in the UK. There were a number of patients, though, who did develop anaphylactic shock or anaphylactic reactions, allergic reactions to this product. So GSK voluntarily withdrew it from the market. Years later, it was found that the anaphylaxis or this allergy was caused not by the active ingredient, which is known as alfaxalone, but by a solubilizing agent in there called Crema-4-EL, which you can think of as basically castor oil. So we've managed to come up with a reformulated product using alfaxalone, which is A, far easier to manufacture, and B, safer to use. And we've shown in clinical trials that it is comparable, at the very least, to propofol in terms of its ability to induce anesthesia and to wake up. But also we've shown, from a safety point of view, it is superior to propofol. There is improved cardiovascular stability, less respiratory depression, and it is clearly differentiated in the sense that it is able to reduce post-operative cognitive decline, and all of these results have been published in peer-reviewed journals. So alfaxalone, the active ingredient, is a neuroactive steroid, and we would be looking at it for general anesthesia. And there are two parts to general anesthesia. The one is induction, in other words, putting you under. The other is maintenance. So we will be looking at it for both of those. We'd be looking at it for sedation, for short-term procedures, and also in the ICU and procedural sedation. Next slide. So the general anesthetic market is a very, very large market, currently valued at, well, probably around $3.2 billion for Sedarex and or propofol. There are other products besides propofol who we would look to replace, and that would be sevoflurane and desflurane. But propofol, sevoflurane, and desflurane are about 64–65% of the market and are still growing at roughly 4% per annum. And this market is being driven by an aging population, which is then leads to an increase in demand for procedures based on that aging population, such as knee replacement, hip replacements, and of course cardiac procedures. And this in turn leads to increased ICU admissions. And in the ICU setting, propofol has around a 60% market share. And this is where the cognitive protective abilities of our formulation really comes to the fore, because the longer you are sedated or anesthetized with drugs such as propofol, the greater the risks of cognitive decline. So it really comes into the fore in the ICU and in treating or anesthetizing older patients. Next slide, please. So there are relatively low hurdles to commercialization here. We've successfully completed 2 clinical trials, a phase 1A safety trial and a pilot phase 3, or rather a phase 2A trial. Both of these showed the safety of the product. It showed its efficacy, and all of this was in direct comparison with propofol or desflurane. We have had a pre-IND meeting with the FDA, and indications is that they would back what is known as a 505(b)(2) pathway, which is not as strict as the regular approach to getting a drug to the market. There is also the potential for an abridged approval in the European market, and that's simply because the original formulation under GSK was approved in that market. So, in summary on this slide, Sedarex is better than the current leading anesthetics. We believe so. The solubilizing agent that we use, called SBECD, is already recognized as safe by the US FDA and the EMA, and is widely used in the drug market. We've got worldwide patents regarding the formulation, and as I said earlier, there's the potential for abbreviated regulatory pathways. Next slide, please. So what attracts us to this opportunity with Biotron? Well, it's a win-win situation for both of us. We get access to additional clinical trial development experience within Biotron. We're a well-differentiated product, and it also brings a later stage product to Biotron's portfolio. And in addition, we also have additional indications in the pipeline addressing some high-growth neuroscientific markets. And this is what I would call the blue sky opportunities that are available to investors at the moment. And at the appropriate time, we will go into more detail about what those opportunities are. That's all I have to say. So thank you very much. And if you've got any questions, please send them through.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the Q&A, and I'll remind you that if you have any questions, you can continue to submit them using the Q&A function Did have some pre-submitted questions. With this new pivot, with the acquisition of Sedarex, are you effectively stepping away from HIV and Hep B? I think that was addressed right at the start of Michelle's presentation, so I don't think we need to say anything more. There's a general question: where do you see the company in the future? Do you want to speak to that, Michelle?
Look, I think that Biotron remains committed to commercialising our antiviral portfolio for benefit of shareholders. The Hep B program in particular does add significant potential short-term value as an asset that we believe will get potential for a fast early stage transaction. But the antivirals are a nice space, but they're tricky. I think it's fair to say. And to be opening up the portfolio and our pipeline to indications such as this one, I think is a really positive thing. The company certainly can keep continuing with additional, programs. And the future really depends on how well the Sedarex opportunity goes. So let's hope that we get this into, get the phase 3 trials and get this really quickly, onto market, and then become an anesthetic company. But it depends on how it all goes, doesn't it, Graeme?
Well, maybe I could just jump in there. I think one should look at this more from the point of view of giving both companies access to each other's core capabilities, with the results being that we can get closer to getting products into the clinic, and that's of benefit to all the shareholders.
Yeah.
And further question, thank you. Further question is, how can this help shareholders? I think you've just answered that, Graeme, and I think you've also answered that with the summary slide of your presentation. There's a question here, I'll summarise: cash in the bank and how can we operate? I think that's addressed too with the capital raising information that's been provided. I don't think we... and then there's a question about, are you still trying to sell? And I presume that means the pursuit of commercialisation deals. You did mention that before, Michelle. Is there anything else? I mean, I think you're still pursuing commercialisation opportunities.
Absolutely, that's absolutely the top of our focus, as well as, of course, the Sedarex opportunity. No, that is continuing. It's we just have to be led by the current conditions in the US. We're expecting things to improve through this back end of this year in terms of transactions, and we will continue. It's not that people are out there saying no. It's just dialogues are continuing.
Thank you. Now, questions submitted during the presentation. Is your new formulation patented? And Graeme, you did mention that there are patents, but would you like to expand on what you said earlier?
So we have global patents regarding A, the formulation. B, we also have patents relating to a new method of synthesizing the active ingredient, which is a lot cheaper than current methods of manufacturing the active ingredient. And there are additional patents that are being filed with respect to the neuroscientific work.
Okay, thank you. Can you supply peer-reviewed papers, references, please? Are there journal articles, Graeme?
Yes, there are, and I can forward those to both you, Rudy, and of course Michelle's got, but I'll forward them on as well, yes.
Okay, if that shareholder would like to get in touch with me at Monsoon Communications, we could pass those on. What would be the time frame to get to market with the new anaesthetic?
So that would depend. Well, there are two distinct markets here. The one is the US and the other is Europe. Remember at the outset that the original formulation from GSK was approved for the European market. So hopefully that would be the first market that we could go to. And that is one of the milestones in the transaction, and that's getting further guidance from the European Medicines Authority about leveraging off that previous registration. In the US, they've said to us 505(b)(2) pathway is relevant, which means we don't have to do a phase 1, we don't have to do a phase 2. There is some preclinical work that still needs to be done, but for all intent and purposes, the current indications are that we could go straight to a phase 3 trial. Those are the current indications.
I'll combine a couple of questions here. Will the company be renamed? And will there be a consolidation of shares as there's potential over 2 million shares after this transaction?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the naming and all of that, it's still way too early to even contemplate all of that. We need to, get this all bedded down and see where things go. We're pretty happy with the name at this point in time. And in terms of share consolidation, yes, we're certainly very aware of the numbers. Share consolidation is always tricky. It never really works out as well as you'd think. Is always a reduction of value. There would have to be a really good reason rather than, there's a lot of shares to actually go down that pathway. And we will take advice at the right point in time to do that. But we're not an unusual situation in terms of the number of shares for an Australian biotech that's been listed as long as we have.
Okay, as there are no further questions, I'll hand back to Michelle for closing remarks.
Okay. Well, look, thank you. I'd like to thank Graeme for his input today. And I think you've really clearly explained what Sedarex is about. And I think people will be able to see what a great opportunity this is and why we at Biotron are so excited by this. Rudy, thank you very much for hosting today. And to people who are viewing this, I'd say watch out for further announcements, and we will do additional webinars to provide additional information. And we look forward to further engagement in coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.